Hello. This is the opening lecture for Module 1 on the Odyssey. I think I'll go for about an hour and stop whatever I get to, see how far I get. And I want to get finish book 16 for this first week. So I'm going to start with book 1. Make sure to have the textbook with you. Sorry. And have it with you and have it available. I'm going to refer to the page numbers. I'm going to refer to the text at a number of places. So I want to begin at the beginning, which is in an epic poem, right in the middle, right? In Medias Res, we begin an epic poem in the middle of things. And so the poem begins, remember, with one of the epic conventions called the invocation of the muse, a kind of prayer or kind of calling and invoking. Invoke is a kind of to pray to or to speak to. So generally the muses are prayed to. Sing to me of the man. Muse. The poem begins. The man of twists and turns, driven time and again off course once he had plundered the hallowed heights of Troy. Right. So that begins not only with the invocation of the muse, but with the statement of the argument. The poem is going to be about this man, Odysseus, who defeated Troy and plundered it and was driven off course and wandered on his way home to Ithaca. So the muse is generally considered a kind of god or goddess, linked to inspiration of human beings, usually in forms of the arts, poetry, music. So I want to pay particular attention to the sing to me of the man, right? The Iliad begins differently. It asks the muse in some way to speak out to the reader and to all readers, so it has a kind of public form. This is private. It's like a private form of inspiration to the poet, directly to the poet, and the poet will speak of the man, and so that it's a kind of indication that the Iliad is a public poem about a very public act, the defeat of Troy by Greece. Odysseus is a private person, one person, and dealing with his own private life in a way, a private tale of one man wandering, trying to return home. So this kind of individualism, and all of us in some form or another, I think, can share in this. How does one return home? This goes hand in hand, I think, as we'll see, with Odysseus coming to know himself. So that's the beginning of the poem, the invocation of the muse, and the statement of the argument. And it continues at line 11 in book 1, page 77. Muse, daughter of Zeus, start from where you will. Sing for our time too. So the poet is open to the muse, beginning wherever she wishes. So there's some sense of giving over to the gods this power. So where does the muse begin? The muse begins. By now, all the survivors, all who had avoided headlong death, were safe at home, escaped the wars and waves. But one man alone, there's the theme again of the individual, his heart set on his wife and his return. Calypso, the bewitching nymph, the lustrous goddess, held him back, deep in her arching caverns, craving him for a husband. So we begin with Odysseus shipwrecked on Calypso's island. Every other warrior who fought in the Trojan War in Greece, from all the different Greek islands all over Greece, have returned. all except Odysseus. He has not returned, and he is alone. So what that suggests, since he's the ruler of Ithaca, what that suggests is that all of his men are dead, and that is true. So we find Odysseus at the very end of his journey, almost at the very end, very near the end of 10 years. We've got very little time left in this. So half of the book, the first 12 books are devoted to Odysseus returning to Ithaca. The last 12 books are devoted to his when he returns to Ithaca and what he finds there at home. The conflict here that's set up in some way is the conflict between Odysseus as a man set apart and the other Greek heroes that have returned home triumphantly. So what's interesting is that he's only mentioned at line 24. We have to wait 24 lines to get to the naming of the man, the great Odysseus. He, in large measure, will take on a kind of nameless category. We'll see this. So it's the loss of one's way home. The law is in some ways tantamount to one's loss of identity, one's loss of oneself. Okay, so to have his name postponed to 24, sort of we're looking for, who is this man? Well, we have to search for him as he has to search for himself. So the poem then again, he's with this nymph, this goddess Calypso on her island. Tradition has it that this was the island of Malta. Again, a fairly large archipelago of islands off the coast of Africa, but traditionally linked, historically linked with Europe. Zeus's council. We begin with the gods at line 37, and Zeus speaks to all the immortal powers. How this is at line 37 to 40, and again you should note these lines that I read. How shameless the way these mortals blame the gods, for from us alone, they say, come all their miseries. Yes. But they themselves, with their own reckless ways, compound their pains beyond their proper share. So okay, yeah, the human beings blame us. Yeah, they're right. But human beings we do bring them suffering, but human beings make it worse. The question is this is dealing with Odysseus, and Odysseus becomes representative of every man, right? Of every human being, every man and woman. We have our share of suffering, but what sufferings come to us by our own hand, and it's through their own reckless ways. I'll throw this out right now for Greek. In Greek, we'll see this especially in Oedipus Tyrannus. The Greek idea of know thyself, right, and know one's limits, know oneself as a human being, is linked. That's a key idea. It's linked with the idea that suffering brings about knowledge and wisdom. So this will be a theme. What can one take away from suffering? Both that caused by the gods, caused by the natural world, caused by external circumstances, and those caused by one's own reckless actions. That should be a theme that you should keep in mind. That's a very important theme. As a matter of fact, I might make that. I haven't really thought about your paper assignment, but that might be your paper assignment. I'm thinking about that. Let me write that down. You'll frequently see me do this. I come up with ideas in the middle. I don't know what. Sometimes I have no idea what I'm going to say. So, what suffering comes from gods and what from human action of Odysseus. Sorry. Okay. So Athena agrees with this. Murderers deserve punishment, she says, but this is at line 53 to 56 on page 79. But my heart breaks for Odysseus, she says. Athena will champion Odysseus. Again, the goddess Athena is the goddess of wit and wisdom. She says fate is against him. He's held captive by a nymph. And Poseidon, Zeus says Poseidon is against him. We'll have to figure out why Poseidon is against him. We'll find that out from Odysseus' own tales. But Poseidon is against him. Actually, it's articulated here. It's because he blinded the Polyphemus, the Cyclops. So that scene will be a really important one. That's in Book 9. We'll have to wait until Book 9 to hear about that. But Poseidon is the father of Cyclops, and Cyclops curses Odysseus, and Odysseus winds up being cursed by Poseidon and attacked by Poseidon. Athena, Zeus agrees here to help Odysseus return home, and Athena will join in. She will inspire Odysseus' son Telemachus, who is at home in Ithaca, whom Odysseus has never met. His wife Penelope, Odysseus' wife Penelope, was pregnant with Telemachus, or maybe he was like 1 year old or something like that. So he's 20 years old. He's 20 years old now. Telemachus is introduced then at Ithaca. He's sitting there dreaming of his father's return. Why? Well, because he wants to see his father, but also Penelope has been waiting 20 years. And men in Ithaca have, 10 now since the Trojan War is over, right? It has been waiting 10 years and refuses to marry any of the suitors. She's holding out hope. Penelope will be a great hero, a heroine in this story. I've written a poem about Penelope and Odysseus. I think I'll send it to you. I think it's a good poem. I'll send it to you on Canvas. So there've been a number of poems written by some of my favorite poets, like Wallace Stevens, who's one of my favorite poets, has written. I don't think he gets Odysseus a little bit. I don't think he gets Penelope. I find Penelope to be an amazing character here. So Athena appears to Telemachus in disguise. She usually appears in the guise of a wise human being. One can ask the question whether this is just if this really is a goddess, or is this actually a wise person who already has kind of godlike wisdom? That's a strange, interesting question one can ask. But he consoles Telemachus and tells him you resemble your father. So what is Telemachus's complaint? Odysseus is not present. The suitors are courting his mother. She's holding them off. They're eating They're eating all the food in the house. They're drinking all the wine, and they're doing nothing. We'll see that the suitors are a bunch of losers. And you should think about that for a minute. I'll develop this theme. But where are all the good men? Well, they went off to war, and they're dead, right? So the losers are and the young men without fathers who are growing up are the ones left behind. It really is a commentary on how war devastates cultures. It happened in World War I. It happened in World War II. Generations, millions of women who lost their sons and who potentially lost a potential mate, right? A potential husband. Devastating for culture. This is the problem that Ithaca and Telemachus, who's the son of the king, is trying to figure this out. So, scene with Telemachus and Penelope here in these opening lines is a scene that raises the importance of memory. The memory of Odysseus is being stirred up by Athena. Maybe it's been lost, maybe it's been submerged, but now Telemachus is bringing this back to the fore in his mother. Okay, so Telemachus is going to be moved now to seek Odysseus. He's told to set sail, and the effect on Telemachus is important. It left his spirit filled with nerve and courage, charged with his father's memory more than ever now. He felt his senses quickened, overwhelmed with wonder. Now, this is the interesting point about the memory here, is that it's not his own memory. It's Helen's own memory. It's a memory that's been handed on to him. He's never really met his father. So that's an important element of memory as well. It's passed on. And the introduction to Penelope lines, I'm going to refer to basically to the lines. They're on the sides there, the lines of the poems. At 376 to 411, 376 to 411, we're introduced to Penelope. How I long, she says, for my husband, alive in memory always. Always. She is frequently referred to as faithful Penelope. I think it's more than faith. There's an endurance here that's really quite remarkable, and she's indomitable, really. And we'll see this frequently. You know, she's there. There's a bard, a minstrel, right? This is typical of Greek culture and many cultures like this. When you're eating and drinking, you have a singer. We'll see the singer appears again. Frequently, the singer sings sad stories. This whole poem is a poem about sad stories. It's a story about storytelling and about the best stories being those that are difficult and tend to be sad. One can only hope for a happy ending. Penelope hears the bard singing of the heroic return of the men from Troy, and she blames the bard for singing of their return because her man has not come back. And Telemachus, however, at line 400 says the bards are not to blame. Zeus is to blame. Right? The bards are just storytellers. They don't. It's not their fault that the stories are sad about human nature. It's Zeus's fault. And of course, yeah, Telemachus is right in some ways. Zeus is responsible in a lot of ways. So the bard is only singing the truth. Telemachus says, a wise 20-year-old. Telemachus, after reproaching his mother, he's starting to get some nerve here. He attacks the suitors. And there's one suitor that stands for all of them. His name is Antinous. We'll see him again near the end of this. Antinous, the chief suitor. He becomes a kind of mouthpiece and a kind of representation or representative of them. They argue about who will rule Ithaca in the coming days, and of course that is the big problem. Who's going to rule Ithaca? So that's the end of book one. We are introduced to the problem back at Ithaca, and the book. I'm going to just jump right into book two. Telemachus sets sail. When it begins, this frequently books begin this way. When young dawn with her rose-red fingers shone once more. This is called an epithet. It's a frequently used phrase. And it's the beginning of the day, and it's beautiful. It's poetically beautiful. When young dawn, rose-red fingers shone once more, right? The sun coming up with rose-red fingers. It's beautiful opening phrase. It captures something of the optimism, the sunny optimism of the Greek world. Friedrich Nietzsche, who was a great 19th century philosopher, always referred to the sunny optimism. It's tragic. There's a wisdom. There's a tragedy and a sense of tragedy and loss. But the new day starts every day. And that idea in the Greek world is very important. So we'll see this phrase used quite a bit. And the true sun, not the sun who's been hanging around, but the true sun of Odysseus rises with the new day, gets dressed, and he's ready. He has a godlike appearance, it says. Ithaca then is called to assembly. What do we learn here? It's the first assembly since the Trojan War has been called, 20 years. What does that say? There's been no civic life. Terrible, terrible situation. No civic life whatsoever. Suitors are intent on eating. They really don't want to marry Penelope. That would be too much of a responsibility. Telemachus is too young to throw them out. And for 3 years now, Penelope has been stringing them along. How has she done this? This is a famous, famous image. She is weaving a shroud, a shroud, a death shroud. And when she is finished with it, she's weaving it at night. When she's finished with it, she'll announce that she's going to marry a suitor. So she weaves it, and then by the morning, takes the whole thing apart. So she's doing nothing. She's holding them off. That image of the weaving of a shroud and the taking it apart is a famous one associated with Penelope. She's weaving a kind of a form of deceit for the suitors, but also she's weaving a kind of hope for her husband. Telemachus prays to Zeus to exact vengeance on the suitors. Why? Because Zeus upholds the guest-host relationship. These guys are being a bad guests. They're just hanging around. No one's asked them to come. You don't just barge in on people and eat and drink their food and their drink. So Telemachus, after telling the suitors to get out, which they don't do, announces his journey to leave. And the name is introduced here. The name mentor obviously means, somebody who counsels somebody. So the name itself is kind of symbolic. Mentor is probably a real person, but mentor, one must assume, is inspired by Athena, probably. And that's exactly what we see. Athena is in the guise of a man named Mentor. She sums up the suitors, or he does, I'm sorry, at line 315 in book 2. See how quickly we've gone through book 2. Not a shred of sense or decency in the crowd, nor can they glimpse the death and black doom hovering just at their heads to crush them all in one short day. So we're going to get a whole long story about Odysseus returning. But this is very close to Odysseus coming back, right? Mentor, Athena in the guise of Mentor, announces the doom coming for them. So this is Telemachus departing with the sailors at night. It's the end of book 2, and I'll read it. It's a wonderful passage. Again, it shows the kind of energy and verve of the Greeks. Suddenly wind hit full, and the canvas bellied out, and a dark blue wave foaming up at the bow sang out loud and strong, as the ship made way, skimming the whitecaps cutting toward her goal. All running gear secure on the swift black craft, they set up bowls and brimmed them high with wine, and poured libations out to the everlasting gods who never die. To Athena, first of all, the daughter of Zeus with the flashing sea gray eyes, and the ship went plunging all night long and through the dawn. So again, the sense of the energy of Greek sailing at this period of time. So book 3 begins again with the dawn and exuberant, and the sun sprang up, leaving the brilliant waters in its wake, climbing the bronze sky to shower light on immortal gods and mortal men across the plowlands ripe with grain. Again, a beautiful image. The sun really shines on both gods and men. It's shared. It's a shared sort of form. Telemachus reaches Pylos, the home to Nestor. Again, with Mentor with him. The customs, when he arrives, the customs are observed. Nestor's son says all men need the gods. And so because of that, they should imitate the gods. This is a really quite remarkable idea. The gods bring suffering, but they also bring good things, right? So all men need the gods, Nestor's son says. And part of that, to show that, one is to offer food and drink and a place to stay to wanderers. This is the guest-host relationship, the first instance of it. And it's especially ordered by Zeus, right? So all men need the gods. Since human beings are dependent upon the gods, Greeks should imitate the gods by giving to people, wanderers, guests, as they need. So the guest-host relationship is articulated in a very interesting pattern. They're fed, and they eat and drink, and then the host asks the guest their name. Strangers, this is an interesting construction. Strangers, friends, who are you? Right? So the process of turning a stranger into a friend is the process by which one offers them food and drink, bringing them largely into their home, where they are made welcome, and then that person reveals himself or herself to the host. This is an important thing because in the ancient world, if you knew somebody's name, you had some power over them. To name them is to give power over them. So how do strangers become friends? Well, then the strangers tell their names and tell who they are through a bunch of stories, and you get to know the person then. How? Through stories. So the poem itself is a story about storytelling, and it's about the building of civilization through strangers who do not know each other becoming acquainted with each other by knowing what they've done and who they are. The stories reveal who people are. So when we get to Odysseus telling his own story, you should keep that in mind. Very important how he reveals himself. So Telemachus worries that he lacks in eloquence. And Athena says at line 27, Telemachus, the bright-eyed goddess Athena reassured him, some words you'll find within yourself. The rest some power will inspire you to say. You, least of all, I know, were born and reared without the gods' goodwill. Right? You, least of all. So, it's interesting. Part of it is natural. Part of speech is natural, natural gifts. Part of it is inspired. Could this be a reference to the poet? Perhaps. The poet is skilled, but to write a great poem, you have to be inspired. So what is she saying? She's saying, well, your father was a man with deep eloquence, great eloquence. You're just like him. So Nestor's tale of the Trojan War rises. I'm going to. It's basically about Odysseus, and the Nestor does not know where Odysseus is. Athena, at this point, as she's recognizing the different fates of all the men going home and Odysseus being set aside, says this about death and fate. It is light work for a willing God to save a mortal even half the world away. But the great leveler death, not even the gods can defend a man, not even one they love that day when fate takes hold and lays him out at last. So the gods, I guess what I'm saying, the gods can help men at various points, and we'll see that Odysseus is aided in shipwreck. But when fate has determined the end of a man's life, that's over. There's a final scene at the end of book 3, at 546, line 546, that I'd like to read very, very briefly. The sun sank, and the roads of the world grew dark as they reached Phaera, pulling up to Diocles' halls, the son of Ortholochus, the son of the Alpheus River. He gave them a royal welcome. There they slept the night. And then the next day, when young dawn with their rose-red figures shone once more, right, they move on. So at night, this is a very important point. The sun sank, the roads of the world grew dark. We live in a world of light pollution, where there's no real places of light that you can find, and so we don't get this idea that the Greeks had of the darkness of the world. When I was 19 years old, I traveled Europe a long time ago, summer of 1981. I did Eurail Pass, and it took me I could take a boat. I had to pay a crossing fee of $18 or something like that. And I slept on the deck of the boat with probably 1,000 other Americans and Europeans traveling Europe the same way I was, on the deck of the ship, and just going through the Mediterranean Sea from Italy to Greece, and it was just the stars just laying in the middle of the ocean. I think that's the Adriatic there. I'm sorry, the Adriatic Sea. But it really, every time I read that passage, I think of that boat ride from Italy to Greece. The fact that when the lights go out, there's nowhere to go, and that's that part that frames this guest-host relationship. You don't want to be caught out in the dark. So the host not only feeds and clothes, but protects, right? From you're left out in the road, you could get eaten by wild animals, beaten by robbers. You don't want to be out in the roads at night. Book 4 details the visit to Menelaus and Helen of Sparta. And Helen was the cause of the Trojan War, right? What's called the Rape of Helen. Paris, the beautiful young prince of Troy, saw Helen, the most beautiful women in Greece, and took her. And the entire Greek world is marshaled, right, for this war to get Helen back. It's a very interesting, strange scene. I'm not going to linger over it. I'm going to do it very briefly, but the Menelaus remembers being hosted when he returned from Troy. He remembers being treated well. He says, "Bring them in, strangers, guests." There's that construction. Strangers, friends, strangers, guests, to share our flowing feast. Help yourself to food and welcome. Once you've dined, we'll ask you who you are. 6970. Perfect articulation of the guest-host relationship. Help yourself to food and welcome. Once you've dined, we'll ask you who you are. Menelaus states the formula for the guest-host relationship perfectly. That's etiquette. That's civilization, right? So Menelaus talks about his earnings, his riches, and he said he's earned them by suffering. And he tells stories of Odysseus, and Telemachus weeps of the memories of Odysseus. Memories, again, not his own. So he's being given a kind of store of memories from other people that now become his secondhand. Helen recognizes Telemachus and says, he's like the son of the great Odysseus. And of course, she is right. She talks about, I'm gonna pass over this whole scene. It's very strange, but she talks about Odysseus's craftiness. You do get the sense that Helen and Menelaus, there's something weird going on there. He doesn't trust her. She's probably not very trustworthy. There's some weird issue here, but we'll leave that. We'll leave that to the side. So we get more stories about Odysseus, the old man of the sea. I'm going to pass that by, and the turn then to Telemachus as he gets home to Ithaca. The contrast between the suitors and Penelope is stark, right? Her emotional state she's distraught. She's grief-stricken. And the suitors are arrogant and boastful, uncaring. So they deserve to be. They deserve what they get, I think. So the first 4 books introduce us to Ithaca, introduce us to Penelope, introduce us to Telemachus, and the situation back in Ithaca. Not a pretty one. Not a good one. All right. So book 5, now we turn to Odysseus himself. But book 5 begins with Zeus and Athena speaking. And Zeus decrees that Odysseus will return with the help of Athena. And so Hermes, the messenger of the gods, goes to Calypso and says, "You've got to release Odysseus." She's a nymph who's holding him captive. The description of Calypso's island at 64 to 83, I won't read it. It's a paradise. This is like some Club Mediterranean, right? Odysseus doesn't have to do anything. He gets to beautiful island. He gets to eat there, drink there, and he gets to sleep with a beautiful nymph every night. So if you read that passage, all of the senses are activated, all of them. So all of the senses are activated, and we see the beautiful place that Odysseus it says, why even a deathless god who came upon that place would gaze in wonder, heart entranced with pleasure. It's so beautiful. It's a paradise even for gods. However, we find Odysseus weeping. So the outer beauty and the inner turmoil of Odysseus. He sleeps with Calypso every night. He wakes in the day. He lives a life of leisure, and he weeps for his wife at night. And so he admits that Calypso is beautiful, more beautiful than his wife Penelope, but he still seeks to go home. He doesn't want to insult the goddess, but it's probably true. It's probably true that Calypso is more beautiful than Penelope. At any rate, he still sleeps with her that evening. But when Hermes comes, she is convinced that Odysseus should be left to go home, and with Calypso's help, Odysseus builds a boat and sets sail. He rejects all of the promises of immortality. Even he finally, after all this time, has come to his senses and realizes he wants to go home. If he does accept immortality, he's no longer Odysseus. Poseidon, at the end of Book 5, causes a ship to wreck, and we see him floundering in the sea. But that is caused by his own action. Remember, Poseidon hates Odysseus. We'll see why later on. But we see something of Odysseus's character. It's not just physical endurance that leads him on the shipwreck. He doesn't get flustered. He's patient, and he has endurance. Long enduring great Odysseus. He's named at 538. Long enduring great Odysseus. Line 5 of book 5. He suffers and he endures, right? And he winds up landing on this island, that's book 6. I'm going to pause right here for a moment and pick it up in a moment. So book 6 is one of the more fabulous books in the entire poem. It begins with Alcinous, the king of the Phaeacians, and his daughter Nausicaa introduced. And at Athena's inspiration, Nausicaa decides that she would like to go wash her clothes by the seashore. And the general tone and color of the scene, especially with the description of Olympus at lines 44 to 52, are bright and shining and rich and happy. The relationship between Alcinous and Nausicaa is warm and caring and intimate. There's clearly a lot of love between the two. The description of Nausicaa at the beach is very light and joyful. They're working, washing their clothes, but it's a kind of play. And she appears in the midst of all this happiness. And it says, Nausicaa shone among her maids, a virgin still unwed. It sets up the entrance of Odysseus. And we again see the importance of host. Remember, he's been shipwrecked. So this is at 131. Man of misery, he says to himself, man of misery, whose land have I lit on now? What are they here? Violent, savage, lawless, or friendly to strangers, God-fearing men? That's a key point. What we'll see in the story that Odysseus tells to the Phaeacians is that he wound up at a place where they were not God-fearing. They were violent, savage, and lawless. So he's worried. What am I going to? Are they going to give me a succor, or are they going to treat me poorly? So notice the point there. If they're friendly to strangers, they're God-fearing. If they're not God-fearing, they're going to be lawless. The two go hand in hand. They're friendly to and there's by the way, the construction of strangers' friends, right? You treat a stranger friendly as if they are a friend, they become a friend. Okay, so a very important idea there, I think, that again articulates the guest-host relationship. So he's described as he's shipwrecked, so it's briny, right? He's caked with, his hair is caked with seawater, salt water. He's a terrible sight, all crusted, caked with brine, naked, right? He looks like a wild beast. He's hiding in the bushes. I'm going to read the line 142. He stalked as a mountain lion, exultant in his power, strides through wind and rain, and his eyes blaze, and he charges sheep or oxen or chases wild deer, but his hunger drives him on to go for flocks. So he's described like a mountain lion. Terrifying, right? And Nausicaa, the maiden, is going to naturally be afraid of him. Odysseus doesn't lose it, though. And he flatters her. He appeals to his wretchedness for compassion. Let me read the flattery. Here I am at your mercy, princess. Are you a goddess or a mortal? If one of the gods who rule the skies up there, you're Artemis to the life, the daughter of mighty Zeus. I see her now. Just look at your build, your bearing, your lithe, flowing grace. Right? Very smart of him to praise her beauty. Right? She's like a goddess. And then he appeals to his own wretched condition for compassion. The host is always superior. The guest is inferior, right? So, because they're in need of aid and their dependency. So he acknowledges that dependency, and therefore is drawn in. She uses the construction again. Stranger, friend, stranger. The white-armed princess answered staunchly, friend. You're hardly a wicked man and no fool, I'd say. It's Olympian Zeus himself who hands our fortunes out to each of us in turn to the good and bad. However Zeus prefers, he gave you pain, it seems. You simply have to bear it. But now, seeing you've reached our city and our land, you'll never lack for clothing or any other gift. The right of worn-out suppliants come our way. I'll show you our town, tell you our people's name. Phaeacians we are, who hold this city and this land. I am the daughter of generous Alcinous. All our people's power comes from him. So this is an interesting, she's wise too. Zeus gives us fortunes. She acknowledges his suffering and his pain. She intuits something about him that's very interesting, and I'll postpone this. But what is Odysseus's name? We will only discover that at the very end of the poem explicitly. You can go look for it, by the way. But she seems to intuit it, and I'll just throw that out there. So there's another simile now. The simile used to describe him after he bathes at 256. Again, similes are epic similes describe something that's like another thing. So the epic similes, I'm paying attention to how the poem works. As a master craftsman washes gold over beaten silver, a man, the god of fire, and Queen Athena, trained in every fine technique, and finishes off his latest effort, handsome work. So he lavished splendor over his head and shoulders now. The Odysseus is compared to the work of a fine craftsman, a piece of art, a statue. Nausicaa's response at 265. Listen, my white-armed girls, to what I tell you. The gods of Olympus can't be all against this man who's come to mingle among our people. At first he seemed appalling, I must say. Now he seems like a god who rules the skies up there. Ah, if only a man like that were called my husband. Lived right here, enough. Give the stranger food and drink, my girls. So we see Nausicaa's got designs on Odysseus. She sees him, hero of Troy. She sees him as a worthy husband. The strategy of having her follow him follow her, is a kind of flirting. She says, just walk behind me. I don't want anybody to think that he's my husband to be. I don't want anyone. She's saying this to Odysseus, of course. What is he thinking? Oh, she's thinking that. So just very obviously coy, but not very kind of forthright too. She's flirting with him here. And at the same time, really is sort of upholding a reputation. Book 6 ends with Athena's answer to Odysseus' prayer to find some mercy and some love at 360. She does not want to anger Poseidon, right? So Odysseus is here disguised, right, for his own sake, and perhaps for her own too. So that's the first 6 books. I was able to complete it in less than an hour, which is a good thing. There'll be 3 parts to this, right? Books 6, 1 to 6, books 7 to 12, and then books 13 to 18. So this is the first section of week 1, I'm going to have this posted shortly, and then I'll start in the next lecture.